Hello and welcome back. I hope you had a good break, and I really hope you enjoyed those sessions earlier on. I'm cock a hoop actually to introduce the panel we've got lined up for this afternoon. Some amazing brains from circular economy, but also it's really important that we talk to people not in the room at the moment. It's really important that we look at tangential markets and we pull in some expertise and some knowledge, because if we only talk to ourselves as circular economy experts, we're just going to go round in circles. I've been working in circular economy since 2012. I ran the RSA's Great Recovery Program with my friend Sophie Thomas, and I've watched this thing emerge, take shape. I've watched Ellen MacArthur change its direction and its trajectory, and most importantly, change its speed. And all of this is good. And I'm joined by four people who can add to that conversation. And in no particular order, I've got Ben Stocking. Ben is a diversity experienced business transformation consultant, eco champion, and catalyst for collaboration. Co-creation is the answer, driven by a burning desire for his daughter to grow up in a more sustainable world. I've got 4 kids, Ben, which I know is technically probably not sustainable, and 1 granddaughter, and I feel the same desire myself. So welcome. Next up, you've already seen her. She's given a really great presentation and a real brain and a real personality in this field, and that's Catherine Weetman. Catherine is an international speaker, workshop facilitator, coach, consultant, and host of the Circular Economy podcast. She's published, she's consulted, she is the top of the tree as far as this is concerned. So Catherine, it's an absolute joy to have you on the panel. And then we've got Winnie May Chan, who's based in Toronto. She's a research scientist and specializes in earth and environmental processes. Her research has taken her across continents, from reconstructing how groundwater conditions have changed in response to climate change in the Yucatan Peninsula, to studying geoarchaeological evolution of ancient ports and Mediterranean Sea. I'm going to stop there because it's too long, Catherine. You're too good. Winnie, you're too good. We'll leave that there. Welcome. It's an utter joy to have you on the panel. And I hope Toronto is a little warmer than the photos I saw of it about a month ago, where it looked Baltic. And then last but not least, we've also seen him already, Wallace Sampson. Wallace, local government local government leader, local government change agent. And what Wallace is doing, he's not just leading a government, he's changing the direction and the way that government works. And that is so long overdue. And to do that from Harrogate, that's news, right? And I lived in Yorkshire for a long time, Wallace. It's a sleepy old conservative old place, and you're in a great place. Wallace is passionate about public service delivery and the need to work in partnerships. And that's what circular economy needs right now. So all of you, thank you for joining me. Welcome. And look, we've got some really, really amazing questions that have popped up, and I've got a couple as well. And I'm going to start with one. I'm going to start with one on policy, actually. And I'll start with you, Catherine. But what kind of policy approaches, what trajectory do we need? And actually, what kind of specific policies do we need in order to encourage regenerative practices and to help meet our climate commitments and the massive urgency that we now know is real in terms of climate change?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I think, as we all know, policy levers can make a massive difference, both for carrot and stick. And it was interesting to hear in the farmer discussion from earlier this morning that they felt policy was important to encourage regenerative agriculture, but they were worried about things like incentivizing carbon capture schemes involving agriculture, because it's still in its infancy in terms of how we measure things. And I think we have to be careful not to set policies now that could turn out to be a step in the wrong direction. So I think it's fairly simple, and a bit like with the landfill tax in the UK a decade or so ago. If we set a direction and show the end game for something, then we can signal to everybody that this is what we need to do to change. So I would say we need to be taxing the use of finite resources, particularly fossil-based resources, which will reduce the attractiveness of artificial nitrogen fertilizers and also petrochemicals. We need to be taxing the use of water as well. and we should be taxing waste and pollution, but we shouldn't be taxing labour. You know, we need people to have jobs, and we've kind of got that a bit the wrong way around. I think there's a movement called the X-Tax Project, which is doing some really brilliant studies in both developed economies and developing economies, showing how green taxes can create the funds needed for investment in new jobs, investment in skills, investment in social infrastructure, and so on. And whatever the size of the economy, green taxes can make brilliant steps in the right direction.
I love that idea. And what we're doing here is we're aligning this movement with the campaign of the New Economics Foundation and some of that redistributive economics, which has been banging around for ages and not really got anywhere. Maybe this is the breakthrough that we need. And what I like about the circular economy is there is a myriad of opportunities to earn more money with less stuff, by selling less stuff. And I think there's also some strategic opportunities here. Wallace, do you see strategic opportunities that fall out the back of this?
Without a shadow of a doubt, there are definitely strategic opportunities, really, not just from regenerative agriculture, but from looking at the whole of the circular economy as a whole. But in some respects, collaboration is definitely key, because no one individual, or indeed no organisation really, can create the scale of opportunity that's required to make a real difference. So I suppose if I look at it in the context of North Yorkshire, which is at my patch, and I was going to identify perhaps one strategic opportunity, it would be to look at the whole agri-food system, how we relocalise that so that we can create much more resilient circular supply chains that is very much more at a local level. I say that because looking at North Yorkshire, it has a really large agricultural base. We've actually got some quite distinctive food manufacturing businesses within our patch. We are a largely rural place. So there are definitely opportunities, I think, to look at the whole system and try to create more localized value chains so that we've got the opportunity to reduce the food miles in the whole supply and consumption chain. There are some real opportunities to do that, in my view. And I think as local authorities, we've got a really important part to play in that as enablers of change.
That's fascinating, and I agree. And I genuinely think that local is a massive part of this. But in terms of like policies, in terms of trying to create local supply chains for school dinner food, for that kind, are you able to tinker and work at the next tier up? Are you able to kind of bring some of that into life?
Yes, I think so, definitely. The really exciting thing about the circular economy is that you can look at it at different levels. You can look at it in terms of circular communities. In North Yorkshire, we've run a project that is very much focused on a rural market town, and we've looked at circular economy opportunities in that town. The project is called Circular Malton. So you can do it at that place level. You can also look at the opportunities at a sub-regional level, or indeed at a regional level. Over the last couple of years, through the York and North Yorkshire Local Enterprise Partnership, we've made great strides really in terms of creating a circular economy strategy at that sub-regional level. It's now creating the foundation for us to be able to now look at those opportunities at a much more broader regional level. And again, this is where I think that the local authorities have got a real role to play as anchor institutions and to lever our role as leaders of place to develop stronger collaborative opportunities across the wider public sector with big businesses in the context of North Yorkshire, with the agricultural sector and representative organisations such as the National Farmers Union, the Wildlife Trust with Yorkshire Water, some real big organisations that together working collaboratively, there is absolutely no reason why we can't actually look at big strategic opportunities at that regional level.
Brilliant. Together we are stronger. I like that. And Catherine, I was really struck by one of the things that you said. And I'm going to push the question to Ben, but it really hit me. Only 8% of the spend on food goes to the producer. My motto is get as close to the producer as I can whenever I buy anything. And that just illustrates that the economy bit of circular economy is really, really important. And back in the day, back in sort of 96, 97, I worked with Ian Copping, and we were working with Interface and Ray Anderson then in terms of reformatting or helping him reframe where his business is going. And right now, the big circular thing that I'm working with Interface again in Atlanta and in the UK on that very same thing. But I'm going to flip the question to Ben and then come on to you, Catherine. But Ben, how do we build an economy that is circular with an emphasis on still making money?
That's the $1 million question. And there's no simple answer, but there's multitudes of answers that we need to find together. Some of them are pre-existing, some of them are already clear, and it's just trying to, I guess, remove the noise in the public psyche, which at the moment is being filled by companies trying to sell stuff, and I guess trying to align the ability to sell stuff profitably needs to be aligned with social and environmental positive impacts. It's no good trying to do CSR type stuff anymore, ticking boxes. What can you do as a business that's unique to you? What can you do as an individual that's within your circumstances? And everyone's got a different perspective and, journey, and we've got to find those journeys together and solutions. And as Wallace said, it's absolutely pivotal that local authorities and all the different stakeholders really start working together. And that's where we've been missing in the past. We've all been working against each other, working against nature, and fixing nature through regenerative agriculture has massive potential. Hence, it's a brilliant conference to hopefully shed light and stimulate some real good conversations and initiatives.
Brilliant. I love that. And Catherine, just a quick reflection from you, because it was your slide that prompted my thoughts. How do we change that 8%, 92% split? How do we change the model to impact positively everyone involved?
So I think it's about breaking away from the lock-in that's been created by big ag and big food companies. They're the ones who've created this power base so they can buy what they want from wherever in the world. And that kind of brings me on to another one of my hobby horses, having worked for Tesco back in the late 80s, and knowing that seasonality was one of our biggest problems, particularly when Easter comes along. You don't know if it's going to be pouring down or sunny. So what on earth do you order 10 days in advance? So they realized that the easiest way around that was to create a market for things year round. So that's where the strawberries at Christmas and strawberries all year round came from, not from consumers signing petitions to say, we want strawberries all year round. It was because supermarkets decided that was an easy way to do it. And then all you've got to do is work out where in the world to get it from at that point in the year. And you can, pick and choose and drive down prices. That's what's happened with pretty much everything, particularly with meat. So I think collaborations, as Wallace said, farmer cooperatives and so on, and farmers are going to have to either get good at marketing themselves or bring in the specialists to compete against this. It's amazed me that during the process of the build up to Brexit, that the NFU hasn't been helping to market year-round local meat. If we can persuade people that they should have strawberries at Christmas, why can't we persuade people that mutton is far tastier than lamb and create our own year-round market for stuff that's grown locally? And I think there's already a movement towards buying direct from the farmer, buying locally. Particularly this has accelerated during the pandemic, when people found, first of all, it was the only place they could buy some stuff. And then they realized that they could have a conversation with somebody who knew where this was grown, what the animals were, how it was farmed. And they felt that they were putting money back into the local community. So I think the time's right for farmers to capitalize on that, build up some cooperatives and start to, take back some of the power from big ag and big food.
I love that. Absolutely. And when I ate meat, my lamb came from 3 fields away. I could see it out of my bedroom window. Ben, did you want to come back in on that?
No, I just think 100% everything Catherine says. It's like a beacon of truth, and it was really interesting watching your presentation earlier, and look forward to getting your book. But yeah, I mean, it's some of the solutions are so simple, but it's just not in the public awareness. I mean, I was reading recently about the fact that deer are massively overpopulated, and that's only increased due to restaurants being closed with lockdown, etc. So there's a lot of an overpopulation of deer, which is actually damaging ecosystems because we've got no predators in this country. Obviously, humans do moderate them, but because of less demand, etc. But that demand, potentially there's just a sustainable meat that's not being utilized due to lack of awareness, etc. There's so many examples.
And that allows me to pop over to Winnie, actually, because some of the work that I've been doing in the past is looking at animal skins in fashion and clothing, and that's one of your passions. And so many of those skins and so much has been rejected because it doesn't quite meet spec. If we just broaden that slightly, how do we build circular economy into the things that we wear at a time when we use shopping as an antidepressant, when we buy clothes that we don't need and sometimes don't even wear, and yet an animal's produced the wool or we've grown the cotton, we've used resources and we're not wearing them. How do we solve fashion?
There's lots of potential with agriculture in the fashion industry. I mean, right now, based on the report was published by McKinsey last year, the fashion industry contributes to 2.1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions in 2018. So that's roughly around 4% of global emissions. And to put to scale, that's amount of emissions that UK, France, and Germany produce. And just within that number, 40% of that is all from within the supply chain. So adapting methods like regenerative agriculture to source our natural fibers, that includes, animal byproducts or your wool and your leather, as well as cotton, which is a really big one and has it's the biggest natural fiber that is in the industry. There can be there's lots of potential in that. There can be lots of benefits in terms of meeting our carbon goals in the industry.
That's interesting, isn't it? And I mean, that's dealing with the kind of materials in and what we choose to make things out of. How do we deal with our appetite? How do we deal with our desire? Is there some kind of consumer program or awareness, or what do we do about needing? I think on average we buy 2.6 pairs of jeans a year. We don't need 2.6 pairs. I've got 52 pairs of shoes upstairs. Well, in fact, some of them are downstairs because I've not got enough room upstairs. I've only got 2 feet. What is it I'm trying to solve by buying all this stuff?
Absolutely. And I think right now it's really the education and really starting that conversation. And with the current pandemic, it has been a major disruptor in this industry. Lots of, you look at the luxury industry, lots of them are coming out and they're talking about not coming up with a new line every season. They're talking about slowing that down, and people are starting to become more aware of the impacts of the apparel and textile industry. I think it's really important to establish, the terms like sustainability, like what does that mean to a lot of these companies? And I feel like with nowadays, the term has been lost in translation in a way, and has been greenwashed in a lot of brands. And I think it's important to kind of engage in this conversation, and like what Wallace and Ben said, it's important to work with a lot of people in this industry, the scientists like myself who understand the science, understand what's happening in our systems, and communicating that to consumers, and also communicating that to the experts in the fashion industry, and working together to find a solution, and also to kind of set groundwork, right? Like identify what the problem is, look at the mess, and identify what ways we can clean up that mess.
That's interesting. And I think I'll come to you in a minute, Catherine, because this is going to reflect on something you said to me earlier. I'm not certain people connect what they put on their back or on their front with something that's been grown. I don't think they see the soil in their clothes, and I think that's really sad. And as we look for all different alternative fabrics and materials, we're going to be growing some of them. So things like hemp and jute, which we've used for, like, indigenous populations have known the answer to the challenges that we face, and we're not listening to them, and it's not good enough. How do we encourage Catherine, how do we embrace these old fabrics in a new way? And then I'm going to come to you, Wallace, in a minute and say, how does government enable this to happen faster, and particularly in relation to hemp? But to you first, Catherine.
Yeah, I think just coming back to how we engage people, I think it's interesting you say people don't see the soil in their clothes, and I think the shocking part that people don't see is not just the soil, but it's all the pesticides and so on, particularly for something like cotton, and that's not just affecting the biodiversity in those fields. It's affecting the people who are farming it as well, because they're not given the right protection and so on, and you're causing immense damage without ever realizing it. So I think we can use some of the backlash against factory farming, the move to veganism, as I mentioned in my presentation, the move towards free range eggs. Sales have doubled in the UK in the last 15 years because people were shocked about the conditions of battery farming. So if we can bring out some of the stories about what's wrong with the system upstream and what you're participating in, what you're voting for if you buy these kinds of clothes and this kind of food, we can start to get people to think differently about it. And thinking about, Ben mentioned deer earlier, and that's kind of seen as an elite food, and yet it's wild, and it's eaten what it wants to eat. It's had a fantastic life. It's known nothing about what was coming until the point it died, and that's so much better than factory farming. So we need to be pushing wild meat and pasture-fed livestock and getting people to really see all the impacts of that, and getting people to think about the choices that they're making every day. And my experience is once people start with one thing, they then feel so much better that they're energized to make the next step and the next step.
And then flipping to the second part of my question, when we're looking at embracing, I agree entirely with everything that you've just said. When we look at moving towards more traditional fabrics for modern clothing, how's that technology advancing? How are we able to process? I mean, cotton, there was a great label in a pair of Howie's jeans that I bought years ago. It was about that long, the label was, and it said 100% cotton, 73% true. And then it listed all the things that were in the cotton. And at the very end, it said, you sit in your jeans for 8 hours a day and you know how nicotine patches work. And that was it. I thought, I'm only buying organic jeans again, right? But I'm lucky, it's a middle-class concern. I can deal with that. So how are we developing new materials to be able to replace the old materials, but really they're old materials? And how do we democratize this movement so that we can all sit in safe jeans?
Well, I think the democratizing comes with showing people the kind of full life cost of stuff. Boohoo and the like are selling T-shirts at £4 and a dress for £10. The social cost of that upstream with people being paid low wages is horrific. But if it's only fit to be worn once or twice, then that's actually costing you a lot more than something that's made with more sustainable fabrics, that's where everybody's been treated well in the supply chain and earned a living wage and so on. So I think there could be more contrasts. Maybe some of the NGOs can start bringing those stories to life. I know Oxfam had a scorecard for food companies and showed what they were doing to minimize deforestation, take plastics out of packaging, all that kind of stuff, and that was quite successful. So I think we need the NGOs to help us, and we need people to start recognizing marketing as it is, and recognizing that the reason we have all these pairs of shoes is because somebody very clever with a PhD probably has sat in a room trying to work out how to sell us that pair of shoes, and how they're going to get that hook in to persuade us that our lives will be so much better if we had this this gilet, that pair of shoes, that bit of tech, whatever it is. And when we can learn to spot that happening, it's a lot easier to wean yourself off it.
Very true. I love that. I do. Most of them are secondhand, I have to add quickly, because it makes me seem like a complete narcissist otherwise. And Wallace, one of the things I'm really interested in, if we're to embrace hemp as a grown crop, there are all kinds of legal challenges to growing hemp on scale, because part of hemp was and is THC, very small part of it, and not all hemp. So how do we begin? How does government, and this may not be your tier of government, Wallace, but how does government get involved in encouraging these things that have traditionally been really heavily regulated?
Yeah, I'll happily answer that. Can I just come back also to the point that we discussed earlier about the economy and economic value? Because I do think that there's also an important cultural change that needs addressing, which is one of not just looking at it in the context of economic value to me and to my organisation, but actually of economic value to others. And if you look at food waste as an example, I think that's a perfect example of a strategic opportunity within the circular economy to say, actually, this might actually have some value and some economic value to somebody else and not to me. So, without a shadow of a doubt, we need to be looking at ways in which we could just reduce food waste per se. But inevitably, that aspect of food waste that would, say, go to landfill, we need to be looking at alternative uses for that food waste, because there is a value and ultimately an economic value to somebody else. And I just really wanted to highlight.
Wallace, you're dead right, and I am going to stop you there, and I feel really bad about doing it, but we've got the next session starting in 1 minute. But I'm glad, Wallace, that you asked the question you answered the question you wanted to answer, not the one I gave you, because I think it may have been a curveball. So look, I'm going to stop here because I have to. We could go on for another half an hour. This is an unbelievably talented panel, and I feel a lot happier that the future is in their hands than I would have done 10 years ago. So thank you all for the work that you do, and thank you all for attending. Just to wrap up, we have got another session now, the last session of the day. I'm going to hand back over to the main auditorium. You're going to run back in there, and then you're going to go and watch Robert Goodwill, MP for Scarborough and Whitby, and he's on the Environment Audit Committee, and he's going to do a session before we close for the day. Thank you all on the panel, and thank you for giving us the time in front of your screens. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark.